Hello people, it is I again, just another little update, a local issue here. There's some people who are trying to keep the local NHS hospital, it's a National Health Service, trying to keep the hospital open to the public as is without these massive changes that are proposed. There seems to be a lot of, I haven't read into the facts of this in too much of a great detail because to be fair, there's probably not a lot you can do when the government says they're going to do something with what they are entrusted to control. But there are things that can be done in certain aspects. And if the government wants to take away all of our hospitals, then the government wants to take away all our hospitals. It's essentially their right to do it while they're in office at this particular time. Now, I'll get to what the impacts of that will be for the individual. But I had the pleasure of going to this Keep Our St Helier Hospital group society. They had a meeting on the 30th of January, and I had the pleasure of going down there. And it was very well organised, very well run. Nice bunting up, lots of brochures, lots of leaflets. And a lovely little social club that it was based in. I wasn't even aware of that place, but it was a fantastic venue, and it was a very positive, well presented, quite hard hitting. A lot of passionate people there who all feel very strongly about the accessibility of nationalised healthcare. I wasn't really the main reason I was there. I was more interested in the reasons of whether they close the hospital or whether they don't close the hospitals. Reform it. What are individuals going to do about it? Yeah. What can they do if they find out that someone has been harmed by the actions of ministerial positions? So let's just say tomorrow someone makes the decision that national healthcare is no longer a thing in England. It's gone. It's gone. We're going to get rid of it. We can't afford it. It's too expensive. It's all gone. All up and down the country, there's no longer free healthcare. It's all gone. Now, someone has to make that decision and commit it to paper in terms of a signature and endorsement. And it's this person who makes that decision, if, essentially taking away a service. If you're taking away a service, then in some respects that person's liable for any harm, injury or loss that someone might suffer as a result of that decision. And that's more the angle that I'm looking at this from. So if you do find yourself in a position where relatives are being harmed, relatives die, through cutbacks and constructed ineptitudes that may come about from government policy, then what are you going to do about it? And that's the interesting thing that I thought I'd go down and just share my 2 cents with the masses. I'm not sure how well I communicated myself to them, but at least I was there and I had a listen and I introduced myself. So we're going to look at this in a little bit more detail, and like I said, I'll give my 2 cents. So what is KOSHH, as they like to call themselves? Example of one of their videos. Just want to pause it there. So they've obviously put a bit of time and effort into the quality of their marketing or their bunting. So this is the hospital in question, a big white monstrosity, St Helier Hospital. Now, I'm all for knocking this down because you can tell the building's aged somewhat. It's getting on a bit. There's a lovely bit of space there to knock it down and build a lovely new one, which is more functional for today's needs. But I doubt that's going to happen. So the NHS Trust, now this is the first thing that I got I got interested in, is just looking at the trust. So everything that the NHS is doing is pretty much in trust. So what does that mean? And that immediately got me thinking about, well, if there's a trust, there's a certain set of behaviours that the trust deed or the trust document will prescribe to the trustees of that trust in order for the good management and well running of the trust. So my angle was introduce myself to this organisation and allow them to look at the detail. What can you do to change anything in England? There's only really 1 or 2 things you can do to get people to do what they're supposed to do. That is by order, by duty, or by contract. Pretty much, they're the main ones. So people don't have access to many duties. We have a duty to each other. um, we we have a contract in a way with the government, which I'll come to later. By registering to vote, you enter into a contract to be represented in the House of Commons, and the House of Commons will make decisions based on policy and manifestos, which is my favourite word, which means both to make clear, to promise and declare, and also at the same time, if you don't do it, it also means to deceive. So, and another angle is the orders. Okay, now orders are court orders, or if you're in the army, there'll be an order from your commanding officer, because they have a right to command their soldiers. Once you contract into the army, they give you orders. And the only other orders really are court orders, which we'll get to in a moment as well. But so that's what I'm looking at. If you want to get action done without having to disrupt a lot of people, without having to sign petitions, without having to take to the streets, without having to march up and down Trafalgar Square or the Mall or Whitehall and shout and cause a big say disturbance, but at least make a scene. Just attack the details. Don't use a sledgehammer to knock in a pin. Tact, whatever you want to call it. Don't use a sledgehammer. Use the right tool. Just use the exact right tool just to get the desired effect. Yeah. So it's about looking at the mechanics of how these organisations are run, so that you can, if there's an angle for you to get the desired result, which may already be constituted, if you like, or written down in the trust document. The stuff that's going on at the moment might be completely contrary to the trust. I don't know. I haven't had access to the NHS trust documents. So if someone has access to that, then by all means, it's a public trust. It's NHS. It's government. It's probably on the internet to have a look at these things. So this is the production value that it's. They're making themselves very, very serious. Good production value. And the other thing, just an example of the kind of rhetoric that goes on and the passions that are being shown by the members of this group. There's a little video here which I managed to pick up on Twitter, but it's on YouTube as well.
This whole exercise.
So this is at a meeting. I thought this was at a council meeting with the local council, the local authority, but it's not. It's actually with the board of trustees, I believe, at the hospital. So they've obviously come to a public meeting and they want to make their views heard to the board of trustees as to what's going on and what these plans are, and how concerned the local residents are, or local people, should we say, not residents. Local people are about having free healthcare moved to an inconvenient place, which may cost lives because of delays in treatment.
This whole exercise is utterly disreputable, and I hope everybody here will make sure that they make everybody in the community aware of this and rise up and prevent this travesty.
So this is the chap who was at the meeting. He's one of the speakers at the meeting. On the 30th. He makes some good points here, but there's a lot of rhetoric about rise up and prevent this trend. Like rise up, you got to be careful with your wording, because rise up, let's fight this, let's bring them down. All these kind of words, you got to be careful, because inciting like a riffraff is something you should never do. You can always do things civilly, as it's sometimes said to be, without the use of any kind of disorderly rhetoric. I just want you to notice the use of the here's. There's a lot of here's in this video, and there was a few here's in the last video, and I'll come to that as well.
And prevent this travesty.
On the 10th of November 2017, the Epsom and St Helier Trust Board held a meeting.
Someone yesterday made the point that this is a trust board. Okay, so it's a trust board who may have been put there by the trustees. So the trust board, whether they are trustees or they've been appointed by trustees to be the board, i.e. the public-facing board that makes decisions, that's fine. If the trustees have decided to return out their trust duties, not a problem. You still directly deal. You find out who the trustees are. You give them an opportunity to answer for it and make sure that they're acting in line with the trust document. If there's any angles that you can see from the trust document versus what's actually happening in reality, you need to bring that to the trustees' attention. Once you've brought it to the trustees' attention, you then need to bring it to the settler's attention, the person who owns the asset. The people own the government represent the people. So ultimately, it's the people. It all comes back to people's property, or if you like, sometimes they conflate people into taxpayers. So in either way, it's the people. Only people go to hospitals. There's no McDonald's and other corporations don't go to hospitals. There's people that go to hospitals, or in some cases they're referred to as patients. But whatever they're conflated into is the people paying taxes from their income, which funds the NHS, and obviously corporations pay tax as well. So yeah, you've got to look at, then you bring it to the head of the trustee, so the settler of the trust, sorry, whoever that may be, or if the trust is run from the some minister of health, presumably, then you bring it to the minister of health's attention. Because until you bring it to these people's attention, he might not know. I mean, you can't assume that the Minister of Health knows what's going on. He might have a rogue section of people who are acting out of character in relation to the operations of the trust that is responsible for these NHS buildings. So you go up the party line. Then obviously once you've gone up one line to the next line of command, to the top line of command, then you'll establish where the fault lies. And if fault lies along all of the relevant people, then you could say you might have a conspiracy going on here. So that's something entirely different, which I won't go into. But that's basically what you give everyone an opportunity to write any potential wrongdoings, bring it to their attention, give them plenty of notice, write them kindly in a short letter, not 2 pages, just like a paragraph, maybe 2 paragraphs at most. Ideally 1 paragraph, and then you just bring it to their attention. You have concerns about how the trust is being run. It appears that people's lives will be put in place by these changes, and that's pretty much as short as sweet as you have to do it. Let's carry on with this video. Have a little look in.
At the meeting, the Epsom and St Helier Trust Board were due to take a decision on whether or not to proceed with the dangerous plan to remove acute services from one or both of Epsom Hospital and St Helier Hospital.
So acute services is basically everything, accident, emergency, everything. It's everything you think of, maternity wards, all kinds of stuff. It's like so much. I'm not into medical treatment, so I don't really know. Thankfully, touch wood. But yeah, basically it's everything. Acute services.
Hospital.
I suppose acute would be almost like a word for niche services. Like niche. So all kinds of little niches, cancer treatments, everything is acute services.
Daniel, you recall that you granted us an audience with you before you even...
See, there's the thing. You granted us an audience with you. So in order to be granted an audience by your public servants, I don't think you get granted an audience with your public servants or those who are turned over the responsibility of dealing with public assets, or the people's assets. You don't get granted. You require at all times. Whatever's going. Daniel, the people require a meeting with the trustees of this trust, because we're concerned about where it's going. So to be granted an audience by your public servants is admitting that you're actually below your public servants, and you're thanking your servants for allowing master to speak to your servants.
Took over here, and you know that we've been on your case ever since. This whole exercise has been the most mendacious thing I have ever seen. You start off by saying we're only going to consider 3 scenarios. You do not consider the scenario of doing what we've asked you to do and you said you would do and have failed to do, i.e. produce a costing for bringing up to standard Epsom and St Helier hospitals. You have not done that exercise. You have simply conveniently eliminated it from all consideration.
So how do, coming back to my point, how do you get people to do something? They either have a duty, you have a contract, or you can give them an order. There's probably others, but let's keep it simple. So do they have a duty to do what you're asking them to do? Is there anything in their trust that tells them that they have to do what you're asking to do? Because if there's no duty, no order, or no contract for them to do so, they'll take it on advisement, and that's lovely advice, but you know what, I've got a job to do here. I'm very busy, I'm going to crack on with what I've got to do. So, it can get you frustrated or angry, and obviously he's not at any liberty to explain to you how to defeat him with a trust order, with an order, duty, or a contract. Then, he's just going to say, thank you very much for that. And in fact, let's listen.
You have threatened people, as the first questioner pointed out, sign up or you lose both hospitals.
All right, that's a lovely accusation to make in front of someone. So you've threatened people. Now we've got to define the threat. That threat is extortion. Sign up or you lose your hospitals. Give me your wallet or I'll shoot you in the head. Yeah. Sign up or you lose your hospitals. Give me your watch or I'll chop your arm off. Yeah. That's extortion, one or the other. You can't make extortionary threats to your fellow man. So you need to say if he's made these threats, if he's written them down, if they've been recorded, if someone's got witnesses to the fact, then you have a controversy. because you can't threaten your fellow man. So if that is the case, this man on the screen here is making an accusation, about someone's behaviour, then you can take that to, and you can prove it. You have to be able to prove it. Remember, you have to be able to prove it. You can't bring frivolous matters before the courts. But if you've got someone who's who's being entrusted with public assets and he's making threats to people about sign up or you lose your lose both hospitals. All right, not just one, but we're going to take away all your hospitals, people. That's using fear tactics and scaremongering, extortion in order to get your way with people. So there are ways to deal with that civilly. Which is appalling and disgraceful in capitals. Interesting use of capitals.
Yeah. Which is appalling and disgraceful. We know where you're coming from. We know what happened to Norfolk Park as a result of your A&E closures in North West London. We know that you started off at PricewaterhouseCoopers, who are deeply into all of this. We heard Charlotte Hall say we can't possibly have consultant-led maternity on 2 sites because we'd never make any money. She actually said that at your first engagements presentation. This whole exercise is utterly disreputable, and I hope everybody here will make sure that they make everybody in the community aware of this and rise up and prevent this travesty.
He's saying rise up. He's using what do they call it, inflammatory words, rise up, and then someone else just in the background then says we'll fight, Yeah. Don't threaten people, because we say, hey, what's his name? Daniel. Hey man, Daniel, you want to be derelict in your duty? I'm sure there's a duty there, Daniel. You want to just, rush ahead and harm the people? Go ahead, Daniel. Be my guest. If you wish to harm people, we can't stop you. You want to go around the streets and run people over. You want to stab people. You want to shoot people. Daniel, do as you wish, Daniel. But once you've done it, know that people are going to require remedy. They're going to require compensation for your actions. Anyway, so he hands it over now. And this is the response you get, which I predicted just a few seconds ago.
Thanks for that, Dave. We're now...
Thanks, Dave. Thanks for that, Dave. that is quite cheeky.
Going to move to the next step, but before we do that, obviously the board needs to endorse and approve
or not
the engagement or not.
That is a presumption. The presumption that this is going to go through as planned. Probably they've had it all. I mean, all these people look like they're working together. So hey manager, I'm going to go against my manager and say no, I'm not going to vote for this. I mean, they're not going to do that, are they?
I'm going to ask them to make that decision. Just to be clear, what that means is the next step, if you approve it, the next step is that this is submitted to the system in its various forms. It goes to...
Remember, to submit is to your sub belief, like submarine. Sub is below, mit is you're giving it, submitting to something. You're below them. You're like on your knees and holding up this document. Oh, please do this for us. So it's kind of like you're doing it to yourself. I don't know what's in this document, but that's basically the angle. They're voting here to submit to someone else's authority. So that whatever they're planning here, they're submitting it and allowing it, and they're kind of saying like, oh, please take away all my money, or please do this, please do that. That's what they're submitting. So they're voting here to submit to someone else's decision-making ability.
NHSI goes to NHSE, it goes into the STP process, it goes to Surrey Heartlands, it goes to South West London, it goes to clinical commissioning groups and to the local authorities. So it goes a long way beyond here, and...
This is deviation, okay, but if you don't submit in the first place, then it's going to go nowhere, isn't it? So by submitting something, this is where the trust, does the trust allow the submission, like the giving off of whatever it is that's going on in this meeting? I don't know what's going on in this meeting, but this is the angle I'm looking at it. Look at the trust document, see what's allowed to be done and not to be done. Is this submitting to some other decision-making process? Is that allowed to be done within the trust document?
In many ways, the decision on the future is not entirely, in fact, is not ours. The decision becomes a system decision.
Oh, Mr. or Mrs. System. You see this? What's a system? Something that I noticed being said yesterday. The they, the we. They're out to get the NHS. They are going to close the NHS out. They. Yeah, these are pronouns. Yeah, or nouns in some respects. They're just nouns, aren't they? no pronouns, because what you got to realise is that I don't know who these people are on the board, but what the first thing you should do is take all their names. So sorry, look, they even got their names on the counter. So go around with a pen, write down everyone's name, right? This person there, that person there, right? And just say, okay, fine. I mean, I don't know what you're doing today. If you believe what you're doing today is right, fine, fantastic. But I've taken all your names. It's called taking names and kicking ass. Kick ass and take names. One of those. Because once you've got people's names and you can prove that they're all in cahoots or acting together in some sort of one unison voice against the trust document or whatever their duty, if they're derelict in their duty, because duty works both ways. You can have a duty to do something, you can have a derelict in your duty because you're not doing it. So I mean, he's now blaming it on the system. The system is a what? It's a nothing. It's Dave in this layer of the system. It's Peter in the next layer of the system. It's Deborah on the next layer of the system, and then it's Malcolm on the next layer of the system. It's all these people, and then you have a chain of people who are all acting together, perhaps in cahoots to do this. Who knows? But let's deal with it here and now. I'd just like to show you what happens at this meeting. Obviously, you think you might have a reasonable the illusion of democracy going on here.
To take what we have done, input it into all the other work that they are doing, and there is a lot of other work going on for the system. And then decide how to move forward. We put up a timetable, which is one of...
Exactly, who's put up that timetable, Daniel? Who's put that up? Just give me the names of those two people who put that timetable.
The ways forward, which could happen, but we are, we can't guarantee that timetable is going to be the timetable that happens, so I need to be clear about that. So,
I would ask you to respect the fact that while we may differ...
Patricia Baskerville, Non-Executive Director and Vice Chair. I would ask you to respect the fact that while we might differ...
In our views, we have integrity in sitting here trying to achieve that. Thank you.
So vote no then.
Thank you very much, Pat. And...
well,
so vote no.
Look, she's not a very good poker player. Look at her face.
Then.
Thank you very much, Pat. And I would now ask the board to say I will invite them to approve this document.
Don't do it, folks.
And
so Lawrence, I was just going to make that explicit. So it's all of the recommendations that are set out on page 57 of the strategic outline case. Neatly summarises all of the points that we as a board need to approve.
And this is what they're
setting
proposing.
What we will do to support the rest of the system to progress all of the work we've set out. So those are the things I want the board to explicitly approve.
thank you, Peter. So it is page 57, chapter 10. So I'm not going to read them all out because it would take too long, but it's quite clear that what we are doing is we are asking your agreement to submit.
So we are asking you for your agreement to submit. So to bend down, we're asking you to bend down, to go below whatever this plan is. So they're asking you could say no, but we're asking you to submit, to go underneath or bow to a higher authority.
And push up into the system the strategic outline case.
And in doing so, you'll push up into the system, whatever that is.
That's it in a nutshell. So, do I have agreement?
I think you should do it one at a time.
No, I have agreement. And is there anybody who does not agree?
We all don't.
Shame on you.
So all the people here who come have obviously got their own views, and they're basically not impressed with what's going on here. But it's interesting that no one on their table disagrees. So basically, it's their decision to make, and I think in a way they just allow people to come in and watch what they're up to, which is fine. See, that might be a duty. They may have a duty to hold open trust meetings or board of trustees or whatever they're called. They might have a duty to do this. So this is why they're tolerating you to be there, because if they could do it behind closed doors, they would do it behind closed doors. But maybe within their trust document, they have to display their board meetings or allow public access to the trust meeting so that the people can see what's going on, because the people are ultimately the only ones who are going to hold anyone at that table to account. They're not going to hold themselves to account. They've got salaries to think of, pensions to think of, careers to think of, keeping the managers, performance reviews to think of. You're not going to stand up against your own ilk at a table, but that's why perhaps there's a duty in the trust document to allow the people to see that so that the people can take action.
Thank you very much. So we will now...
Now someone starts chanting "Shame on you" like they're outside the what's that guy's name? The courthouse up north. Oh God, I can't remember the BCG guy. Can't remember his name.
Take that forward. Thank you very much.
Any abstentions?
No, there weren't any abstentions.
There were no abstentions, no opposition. Shame on you.
There we go. So there we go. So whatever was going on at that meeting, everyone went along with the party line, towed the party line, so to speak. There's something else that happened a lot yesterday. Other than the use of pronouns, you need to get away from pronouns. I mean, thankfully, the people who did the subtitles on this put the names up of the people who were speaking or addressing the public, which is exactly right. Because if anyone is derelict in duty here or there's a coercion, then you can suspend, the trustees and appoint new ones. Right, what else is going on? Apparently, there's been a few at the meeting yesterday. They were talking about some of the things that doctors apparently have come together and voted against some of the initiatives that have been going on to reform the NHS, which is good because there's a lot of doctors, and to pay off the whole nation's worth of doctors in order to get them to toe this party line, that's obviously something that would be quite expensive because doctors probably don't come cheap. And hopefully doctors will judge with their morals, which is the only thing that's going to really save us here. There's been some things mentioned at the meeting yesterday as well about private patients targets. It used to be about a 2% that, like government-owned, state-owned hospitals could have 2% of patients as private patients. And the thing that shocked me at this meeting, they said it's actually gone up to something like 49% of the of the income can come from, of the treatment can go to private patients. So that's one hell of an increase, which obviously underpins the motivation or the direction of where that's going to go in the future. Couldn't really be much higher. And the thing is, let's play devil's advocate here. If the hospital is taking money from private patients in order to treat them, let's say preferentially, maybe, then the hospital's making money, which allows it to operate and fund its core services. Ideally, that's probably the spin. In reality, it'll probably just go to some profit somewhere. But of course, you're using taxpayer funds now. If you consider yourself a taxpayer, they're using taxpayer funds, so public money, to finance private initiatives. It's a bit like quantitative easing for banks, really. The taxpayers are bolstering up the private industries that should actually have the risks to fail. The other thing you mentioned at the chat is that the actions of KOSHH is put back the schedule. It's put years behind schedule, so they're taking some victories there, and they've actually managed to do one thing, which was attributed to the doctors' vote that actually, I think it was SASA or something like that, actually managed to get stopped. An interesting phrase used at the meet yesterday was something about the ripples in the river of justice, and someone started getting onto the law side of things, which was about as deep as they went into it. But essentially, if you get into the law side of this, then you can see what exactly is going on. You can actually interlope in this trust. That's probably a good way of referring to it. You can interlope or impose trustees or remove trustees in order for the trust to operate as intended. And one of the things was I believe that people will die as a result of these changes, which is quite accurate, because if people can't get to hospital if it normally took you 2 minutes to get to hospital, now it's going to take you 15 or 10, then you might have died in the hospital in 8 minutes. So there we go. There's a liability claim right there. Well, why did you close the hospital when I could have got to there at 2 minutes, but now I'm gonna be like 15 minutes before I get to hospital, and people are going to be dying in those minutes. Yeah, and a lot of things about taxpayers. There always a lot of people were talking about taxpayers wasting money, which is an interesting angle. But one thing I just want to mention about the here. This might seem off the rails, but it's just a pet hate that I have. Is that let's look at if we can, the most extreme case of here. This is essentially rhetoric of this house, this members club. Yeah.
Order! Miss Order! Order!
point I made to the chap who was also hosting a show. It's like I don't know why the people feel like they're encouraged to imitate the people in the Houses of Parliament, because this is customary, this is culture, this is behaviour of this particular house. Here. No one says that out in the real world, yeah. None of the people should use this. We shouldn't be intimidating our public services, our public servants. We shouldn't be impersonating, our public servants, because they're there to do a job on our behalf. These are the people you vote for, yeah. This is once you register to vote, you sign up to vote, and you get represented in here. You're giving them the reins to do as they wish, as they see fit to run the country in a certain way. So that all comes back down to the hospitals now. So when you see your hospitals being managed in a certain way, it all comes down to your vote in the Houses of Parliament for your representative. That's allowed your people in your local area to be turned over your ability to self-govern to a local representative who will vote for or vote against government policy. Now the question is whether these hospital reforms are even government policy, if it's even been given to the House of Commons to vote on, or if it's even been given to the people to have a referendum on. It's probably just going on in the back rooms anyway, as a day-to-day running of your government. Now the other thing I want to look at is the trust document, because I just want to give a little overview of what trusts are and how you've used trusts pretty much every single day of your life, but you may not be aware of how they work. So I just want to kind of highlight it. Now I've looked online for some images of trusts, and trusts are very simple. Quite often they're a triangle, and this is as triangly as I thought was good enough to use. There are some others, but they go off in other tangents. But this is essentially there's three parties to a trust. Yeah. And the triangle here has been split up in a classic. It's incorrect. What should happen is the trustee at the top is the person who's going to is the doer. This is the owner of the property, and this is the beneficiary of the property. Now, there's all kinds of trusts that can be set up, and the most simple example of when I was in America helping someone out with a law case over there in where was it? Southern state somewhere, and his son got into some trouble, and I was just basically trying to explain to his son what a trust is. And we happened to be in a restaurant at the time, and I had a drink, and I said to him, look, and I had another law buddy there who was very, very funny, and he could drink 10 times more than the average man. And I was like, look, here's an example of a trust. I need to go to the toilet. This is my pint of beer. I'm going to leave my pint of beer here, and I'm asking you to look after it to make sure that drinking animal over there is not going to drink any of my beer. So if I come back from the toilet and I find that my lager's gone down or my beer's gone down any more than it should have had, I'm going to hold you responsible for not protecting my property, which would be within the trust agreement with this minor. If it's gone down, then you're going to pay me or you're going to get or fill up my glass to the level of beer that it was before I went to the bathroom. Now, of course, he can refuse the terms of the trust. You can't impose a trust upon someone, but essentially, as a minor who's going to do it is told and respect his elders, he's going to do what I tell him. So that's essentially a very simple way of a trust. A trust. I have something. It's a glass of beverage. I entrust it to someone so that I can relieve myself in the bathroom. And when I come back, I expect it to be at the same level that it is. And then I take it out of trust and back into my own ownership, back into my possession, so to speak. It returns as my property. And as long as I'm happy that no one's interfered with my property, then I consider that trust agreement concluded and ended. So that is the smallest and simplest example of a trust. But trust agreements are everywhere. And always think of it as a triangle, yeah? Now, this is a classic example of what people assume is the rights format of a trust. But at no point do you think that the trustees are up here at some sort of godly height. The settler at all time, without the settler, there is no trust. Without someone who has something or owns something or has property, there is no trust. So I would always put the settler at the top. The trustee would be here, and the beneficiary would be here. Okay, because the trustee and the beneficiary are basically the people who are doing the day-to-day on behalf of the trustee, on behalf of the settler at the top. So this is the classic example where the trustees are elevated to, we're the trustees of a trust. Yeah, right, great. So you're the busybodies that has to do what they're told in accordance to the trust agreement. Now, this is obviously a written format, but trusts in common law don't have to have a written contract. Like my example in the pub, that is an absolutely valid, lawful trust with a minor. I won't go into the minor aspect of it. But essentially, with that, the kid who's at the table looking after my beer, that's a completely valid trust, and there was no trust document. Yeah? There doesn't need to be a trust document in a common law land. The voice agreement, your word, is very powerful. This is why you should never lie. You should never tell fibs. You should always do what you say you're going to do when you're going to do it. So if you say something, you're going to be at somewhere for 10 o'clock, you need to be there for 10 o'clock. So if you're there at 10:01, you're late, you've broken your word, and your word's not worth a penny. Same with lying. Once a liar, always a liar. Once you've lied, you've always lied. How can anyone trust you ever again? So it's very important in our land that you do what you say you're going to do when you say you're going to do it. So this is a trust document. So let's look at this from the NHS's point of view now. So settler. So who's the settler? Who owns the NHS? You might say, well, Her Majesty's government owns the NHS. Okay, excellent. So who owns the Her Majesty's government? Well, that's the Queen. Oh, okay, the Queen owns Her Majesty's government. Yeah, I can see that. Makes sense. So who owns the Queen? Well, the Queen is owned by Elizabeth Windsor. Okay, Elizabeth Windsor. That sounds about right. Because Elizabeth Windsor is the woman who has the person of the Queen. The person of Queen belongs to Elizabeth Windsor. She's entrusted with it. So let's go to the top of let's go all the way back. Ignore the NHS. We'll go all the way back to the fact that the Queen owns Her Majesty's government. So what's the settler? So let's look at the Queen now. So the Queen, who is the settler of the Queen? Who's the trustee? What is the Queen? Is the Queen a trustee? And who benefits from having a Queen? So who benefits from having a Queen? That's an interesting one. So let's look at it backwards, reverse engineer this a bit. So the Queen, who benefits from having the Queen? Well, the Queen obviously benefits, yes, but how does the Queen benefit? Well, she has all the property of the kingdom. So she's entrusted with all the property to use and enjoy for the benefit of the people and the nation. Protection of borders, smooth running of government, peace and quiet, law and order, all that kind of stuff. It's entrusted to the Queen or the King, whoever happens to be there. So they have ultimate power to go about their day in order to ensure that those things happen. Because obviously if the Queen started going around killing people and being a generally terrible Queen or monarch, then guess what happens? The settlers, the people who or the beneficiaries would not be so it won't be so beneficial for them to have a monarch going around doing such things, and that beneficiary would have to change that. And how would they change that? Well, it turns out that the beneficiaries of the Queen are also the settlers. The Queen acts at the pleasure of her people. The Queen and the land, or the Queen and the people are one. Yeah, because if the people don't believe in the Queen, there is no Queen. If the people believe, oh, we're going to have a republic today, then what happens to the Queen? You understand? So the settler, people who own the property, is all of us, including Elizabeth herself. So Elizabeth and every single people, if you like, on the country are the settlers, because Elizabeth just happens to be entitled as the Queen or King to be the trustee to run the country for the benefit of everyone. So that's basically it. So the Queen is the trustee. Now let's look at the government. So the Queen is the trustee of the government. No, sorry, the Queen is the owner, the settler of the government, but the Queen is a trustee to the people. All right, so it all comes back to the people, which is often harked around the chambers of commons that, you know, sovereign power this, sovereign power that. The sovereign is the Queen, but the people have the power, because if the Queen acts at the people's pleasure, and if the people are not pleased, then essentially the monarchy is putting their trusteeship in jeopardy. So just to bring that all back. So yes, the government has every right to the Houses of Parliament. The government has every right to administrate it as they see fit. But if they're not doing it in accordance to trust documents, or if they're not doing it in relation to their duty or their work contract, you know, they're going to have all kinds of things that can be attacked here in order to look at. Hang on, you're taking away free at point of service healthcare for the people. You know, you're taking away the ability for people, because the problem with this is it's not as if I can walk down the street and say, oh look, there's a private practice there, and I can go in and say, hey, fix me up. There's no way that people can do that in this country. Our country is a country of monopolies. Monarchy is the first monopoly, right? But anyway, all the other there's so many monopolies going on and protected protectorist systems, is that right? Protectionist systems, sorry, that are going on in order. I mean, just take the black cabs in Uber drivers, yeah, the protectionist attitudes in our cities and our countries to keep monopolies going, to keep prices fixed, so that people have a certain level of standard of living. So it's not like I can go down the street and see a doctor of my own volition and say, "Hello there, I'd like to get well." Yeah, there's no such thing in England. If I want to go private in England, the private practice has to get a referral from the state system of the NHS. So I have to go to the public service to see my GP in order to then get some sort of referral or agreement or something or other to then go private for my treatment. So it always comes back to choice at the end of the day. I have no choice. There's no choice I have to go private. I always have to burden the NHS with any medical treatments that I've got. And herein lies the problem, is that if I'm the richest person in the country, I still have to go to the NHS to get the ball rolling, which is essentially choice being made on my behalf. Whereas if I'm the poorest person in the country, I still have to go to the NHS to get my treatment because I can't afford any other kind of treatment, which is a yes and a no. Now, I was speaking yesterday at the meeting. There was some medical professionals there, and there was one case where this lady who was found to be negligent in her role in some what appeared to be ridiculous manner, who was obviously in the medical profession, so she was struck off. So apparently she was one of the most gifted and well trained, and got the top marks as top 5 in the country or something like that in terms of people, consultants who were able to do their job, but they were struck off because of this incident or accident or whatever, or liability claim against something that happened. Maybe it caused someone to die, and so therefore they have to put, the buck has to fall with someone, and in this case she was struck off. So what happens to a doctor who's been struck off? Now probably they go through a massive pit of depression, and they wonder what they're going to do with the rest of their life. But ideally, what this person can do, there's nothing. If you're trained, if you're professional, if your work revolves around helping people, and that's what you want to do in life, there's nothing stopping you from going private and contracting privately with private people. Yeah, there's no one who can interlope on a private agreement. Like my example with when I was in the pub, if I'm entrusting my pint to a minor, a kid who's under 17 years old, something like that. If he's 17 years old and I'm trusting him with a contract, then yeah, you could say, well, that contract's invalid because of the fact I'm trying to make a contract with a minor. But if there's a benefit to the minor, like I say, look, and if you look after my beer and no one else drinks it, I'll give you a bag of crisps. It's now a completely valid contract because there's a benefit to the minor. If there's no benefit to the minor, there's no reason why that minor should have to do anything other than as some sort of duty to respect his elders and do what he's told until he obviously reaches the age of manhood. So that's basically the angle I'm looking at it. So what I'm trying to say is, if doctors start standing up to, or if whether they stand up to it, whether they disagree with this policy, whether it really affects them morally to take loads of money at the cost of service, then that's a personal, private decision. But invariably, the more you fight against your own society, people are going to start getting kicked out of the medical profession for basically not towing the party line. Now, I think that's probably the interesting point in this whole NHS reforms is the British Medical Council, I don't know, whoever's in charge of all the doctors, they're probably in a real interesting position at the moment. They're like, well, what are we going to do with our members? How are we going to sell this to our members? How are we going to move this forward? Now, obviously, the only way to do it is to offer them shed loads more money and better pensions and better opportunities, less working hours. They're going to give them the whole spin in order to convince you. But if people who got into medical profession not to be rich, but obviously that's a nice thing to have a good doctor's salary. But there are people who are going to be looking at it from a healing point of view, looking after your fellow man. Ideally the principles that most people get into healthcare is to help people who are sick and get some sort of job. Probably one of the highest job satisfactions you can get is from helping your fellow man get better and to see, happiness return to people's lives. So people like that, if they do, resist the system and get kicked out, or they just want to step away from the system, then obviously you're basically going it alone. So things like getting access to drugs is going to be tricky. How are you going to get paid? Where are you going to work from? How are you going to advertise? It all becomes very, very tricky, but it's not impossible to do. There is nothing stopping you, as far as I'm aware, to contract man on man with people who wish to get better. If they trust you and you trust them, then you're liable for your actions. then obviously if you harm anyone, then you're liable, as opposed to being insured under an umbrella organisation like the British Medical Council, BM, something like that, where they provide your insurance as part of their membership. But that's essentially it. So it's interesting times. Now, if you find yourself, there was a bit of a horrible story actually about an old lady who died after being diagnosed with something, and having an instruction given to the hospital. The hospital took this lady in and sent her home, and then she tried to get back into the hospital. She wouldn't be allowed back in, and she stayed at home, very very ill. And eventually, it came to the moment where she got so ill she died, I think, in hospital or on the way to hospital, because of a complication of not being treated at the first point of call when it was instructed to do so. So in cases like that, the first thing you've got to look at is next of kin. Okay, so if you have a relative who has been mistreated in a hospital and it's caused their death or injury, because unfortunately with medical conditions, quite often death is a serious outcome. Serious outcome, unfortunately. But sometimes it might just be an infection, or it might be some other kind of harm that might not be death. But let's look at death in particular. If someone goes to hospital and they do die, then there will be liability will lie somewhere on the chain of command if someone hasn't done their job, and it's only when people start holding people to account in relation to what's going on in terms of dereliction of duty. So if someone has a duty to do something and they don't do it, that's dereliction of duty. And especially if that's causing people to die, that's this is why these people get such high salaries and high stakes. It's a high stakes game, medical care. And this is why the government decided to take it on and nationalise it. So don't worry, we're not going to have a private system of dog eat dog with the medical treatment. The government decided, no one else, the government decided, the people who are in government at the time, you can find the individuals who came to this decision and name them, but these people who were in charge of the government at that time came to the decision, we're going to nationalise the NHS so that we standardise the level of care. People can always get a doctor if they need to have a doctor if they've fallen over, and they hurt themselves. In which case we stop all this nonsense with, you haven't got any money. We're not, like you hear in America that people get turned away if they haven't got a credit card or medical insurance, so they can't pay for the care. Then why would they? Why we don't work for free as much as we'd like to, But we've all got bills to pay, so that's basically the advantages of having a nationalised healthcare system. But which unfortunately has turned out to be a huge cost to everybody. So there's definitely some rejigging going on with the NHS system. Yeah, it's a tricky situation, but I'm just trying to help people who are patients or suffering. The way that you can do it is you have to bring a claim against, claim of damages, because obviously it'll be damages against the people who are negligent in their duty. Because until you hold people to account, there's going to be no punishment. There's no repercussions for wrongdoing. And as long as people know that they can get away with being lazy, derelict in their duty, maybe even maliciously so, as long as they know they can get away with it, then why would they stop? So that's why people need to be empowered to know what to do if they find themselves as being caused damage or injury or loss because of what's going on with the mess that seems to be embroiling the NHS at the moment. There we are. I know it's a long-winded video, but I just wanted to cover some of the points in a bit more detail than I had last night at the meeting. Just literally just introducing myself to these people, and hopefully in the future we can go forward and have a nice presentation about how to actually solve this in lay terms.